Hi, my name is Pablo Zabaleta and I welcome you to this video where we will be covering Chapter 10 supplement of the Heizer and Render book covering work measurement. As always, let's start first with our outline. We will be seeing in this short video why standards are necessary, what is the basis for determining the labor standards, how do we determine standards by using time studies, and how do we determine standards by using sampling of the works. Why are standards necessary? First, to be able to be rigorous. And the crucial word here is exactly this one: rigorous. We must avoid at all costs being ruthless. We must be rigorous. We saw that difference previously, and it is essentially laid bare in the work of Collin and Porras. Why are standards necessary? To be able to determine, to define the cost of labor, what are staffing requirements, and also our production capacity. We also need the standards to define the incentives. They are the basis of the incentives that we will be using if you want to be seen as somebody who is transparent and just. Finally, so as to be able to measure the staff efficiency. What are the basis for determining labor standards? Well, first, historical experience. What has happened before is a very good guide of what's going to happen in the future. Second, time studies. This is something that ought to be done by specialists, essentially industrial engineers who have specialized themselves in determining this, in doing these time studies, so as to define the labor standards. We can also use default time standards, something that we can buy from companies that are specialized and who have all this information ready to be consumed by organizations. And finally, work sampling. We go and observe the work and we measure. Again, this is something that is better done by specialists. Now, let's go a little bit deeper into each one of those four. Historical experience. It's based on previous historic things that have happened. They are cheap. They are dirt cheap because we already have that information. However, they are very they have a very low reliability. Why? Because we have only observed. We don't have a foundation to know if they are good or not. Second, the time studies. You measure the required time. Something's not working here. Okay. You measure the time required to perform a task. Okay. What are the pros? Well, if you measure, you have a very solid methodological bias. But the cons is that they require specialists and they cannot be determined a priori, that is, beforehand. We can also use the predetermined time standards. These are based on the sum of times required for all the works. The pros, they tend to be perceived as objective, they serve for planning, they do not interfere with our operations. The cons is that they are expensive. And finally, the work sampling. It estimates the percentage of a time that an employee spends performing multiple tasks. Plus, it's relatively cheaper. A single analyst can make multiple measurements and does not distort the phenomenon under measurement. However, it's inaccurate. So, how do we determine the standards by using time studies? Well, first, we must define the universe where we will be applying this study. Second, we divide the task into discrete elements. Third, we decide how many times we're going to measure the tasks, so as to be able to capture also the standard deviation, the mean, all that kind of stuff. Then we measure. Then we calculate the average observed cycle times. We determine the efficiency index and calculate the normal time for each element. And we add the normal time for each element and get the total normal time for the complete, and then we calculate the standard time. As you can see, this is something that is usually done by specialists, people who know how to work around work time studies. However, if you think things very seriously, you'll find that once you have measured everything, you add up the 5 oscillating digits factor to be sure. That is to say, more or less this. It's not something that convinces me much. So, what does the book say about determining standards? You take a preliminary sample to get an estimate of the parameter value. You calculate the required sample size. You develop a measurement capture plan. You determine what employees spend their time on. You define a plan beforehand and you stick to it. So, just to close this video, why are standards necessary? Because we need to avoid being ruthless. We need to be seen and perform as rigorous. Second, what are the bases for determining the labor standards? Historical experience, time studies, default time standards, and job sampling. We also saw how do we determine standards by using time studies, and we saw how to determine standards using working sampling. As always, I thank you for your attention, and I hope to be seeing you in our next video in the series. Goodbye.